on YouTube after.
All right, I would like to call this meeting of the Pownal Planning Commission to order, or, yes. I'm so tired. June 2021, we need to approve the agenda, approve minutes for May
Make
18th.
sure that speaker is.
Sorry.
Right.
Right.
At home, if you don't move that speaker in front of whoever's speaking.
For May 18th, not June 15th. We need to change that. We're gonna do a tiny homes discussion, a discussion on flying objects and drones, a discussion on village designation, a discussion with Jim Sullivan on tiny homes and flying objects, schedule a date for the new hearing, public comment, and then adjourn. But we also have to add in there a discussion about camps and cars on private property.
That's a lot to cover.
Yeah, we got a lot to do.
Okay, let's get going.
So anybody,
Make a motion that we accept the minutes.
second,
The agenda.
the agenda, yep,
Second.
With additions.
with additions. Second, Megan, John, aye, Brian.
Aye.
All right, so approval of minutes for May 18th. Does everybody have a copy of those minutes? If they don't, I think there's some right here in the center. Can I entertain a motion to accept the minutes from May 18th?
Yes.
Jim, second? Anybody?
Second.
All right, do we have to do roll call? Yes,
We
because
haven't
Brian's
done
Yes,
on
it's
there.
Brian's online.
All right, John?
Aye.
Jim,
Jim.
Ronnie,
Aye.
Megan,
Aye.
Megan Randall here.
Brian,
Abstain. I wasn't there for it.
and I, for me. All right, so discussion on tiny homes.
So,
Go for it.
I thought that, Tiffany and I were the ones who were supposed to do research on tiny homes. So I went to the state to see what the statutes were and found nothing, and then found that this bill, H 347, in committee. It's in the House General Committee. Does that sound like a place? But anyway.
Yeah, that's the
I
place.
think I wrote that down really
That's the
fast.
place.
So I'll just read the couple of relevant paragraphs. This bill proposes to provide that tiny houses shall be subject to the same requirements as other types of single-family dwellings for purposes of building codes, zoning, and taxation, and shall be subject to the same requirements as mobile homes for purposes of tiny house parks and the sale and transfer of tiny houses. So, and then the third thing that we were saying was the same, Tiffany spoke to her people,
I spoke to
Arlington,
communities around us
yeah,
and what they do with tiny homes.
and they basically do the same thing, treat it like it's either a single family dwelling or a camp. It doesn't particularly mention camps in here.
Well, it's just,
So
they
we
treat it
can-
however it's gonna be used. If it
How
has
it's used.
wheels, it's a camper. If
Right.
you're gonna use it as a camp, it's treated as a camp. If it's gonna be used as a single family dwelling, it's gonna be taxed as a single family
Right.
dwelling, so for use.
And so if we agree to that, which seems reasonable, especially since this bill is in committee and will probably be passed, it's non-controversial and so on. We might as well go along with what the state is doing, right? Then we would just need to add a definition of what a tiny house is and then stick tiny house in the relevant places in the bylaws. Does that make sense?
And they were specifying comparable to a mobile home park.
Basically,
Yeah,
that's what they refer
yeah.
to a lot, mobile homes.
Yeah,
So it looks like a kind of a way to replace some of those smaller, older trailers.
Right.
So, as used in this section, a tiny house means a structure intended for year-round occupancy that contains facilities for sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation, is constructed on either a permanent foundation or on a trailer or semi-trailer. So that would be treated as a,
Slab.
as those terms are just defined pursuant to section blah, blah, blah. And C, has no more than 400 square feet of floor area, excluding any loss. So that's, to me, a good definition. We could slip it in to our bylaws as they are written now. And just, treat it as they're used. I can't see anything objectionable in that. I do think that, the person who introduced this bill, Representative Christie, feels that they should be encouraged. Tiny houses would encourage young people to come in. Some people think that's not stretching it a little, but whatever we can do. Anyway, that's a point in its favor, in their favor.
Is there saying the max square footage to make a small house or tiny home? That's just, did you say
It
it
was
was 400?
400.
So anything over 400 would be a house or something else.
Yeah.
I mean,
Anyway,
I get all that, but at the same time, it's still a house. And the regulations are the same.
Right, exactly.
So
treat
I
it-
don't even know, other than potentially this question of defining tiny homes in the context of a tiny home park, so they'd be subject to the same regulations in a park setting as a mobile home. I don't understand why you need it. If it's a house, it's a little house.
Yeah.
If it's used as a
Well,
camp,
I
it's a
mean,
camp.
what we're just officially stating, we're only doing it because the select board asked us to. And
Yeah,
I would like to
get
get
it.
these things passed.
No, I
You
agree
know.
100%. I don't understand the functional difference from a zoning
No.
perspective. Like,
There isn't any difference. I
well,
mean,
it
we
doesn't
just-
make any difference in whether it's 400 square feet or 200 or 1,000 or 2,000. If it's a house, it's a house. It's subject to all the same zoning
Exactly,
requirements.
but
So why do you need a whole separate thing on tiny homes?
And Megan, I think Michelle has something to say on Zoom. Michelle Peckrow.
Couldn't you have one sentence that just says tiny houses will be regulated as?
Yeah, it should be 400 square feet of floor area excluding lofts. That's the official definition. Because some of them have the bottom floor, then they have a small loft for sleeping area.
yeah, that was in the definition that,
Okay, yeah, so I didn't hear that part. That's, I just wanted to make sure.
My concern, I'm sorry if I'm- but-
Go ahead.
But it's like, if you put it in the bylaws, people are gonna think there's something special or particular, and they're gonna wanna be applying for a tiny house. And it's like, well, it's just the same thing as applying for a regular house. So why? And they'll think that there's some special allowances and provisions, and they'll try to do a tiny house instead of a regular house, but it's all subject to the same requirements. So
well, what we
Why-
could state that up front, you know?
Well, does-
We're
Tiny
We're
houses,
getting kind of long now. Like we were going for one sentence, like tiny houses are whatever you're gonna use it
well,
for.
we use the definition,
Mhm.
no more than 400 square feet exclusive of loft and used for this and that and whatever.
I
I mean,
also
just
don't,
lift it out of here is all I'm saying.
I
It's
also
easy
don't
to-
see tiny houses blowing up in Pownal.
No.
If I read the bill, he's
Hold on, why
referring
don't you
to
wait till
tiny
we're on
house
the record?
parks or trailer
I'll
parks.
come over. I'll come over.
The only question I have is about camps. How would that work? Because if they're used for a camp, are they a house?
No, there's
No,
no,
so
They're
we have
camp,
zoning,
camp,
we have
and-
bylaws.
So we haven't addressed camps in the rest of our bylaws, have we?
Well, when last we left the bylaws,
Yeah,
we
camps are
were,
the bylaws.
we were asked to,
Yeah.
to add camps, because camps are right now listed and defined as an allowed use in the forest district. And folks said, well, they ought to be allowed in the rural residential too, and fine, that's easy enough to do, just add them to the rural residential 1 and 2 districts. And the forest district regulations, has, I flagged it, it has a definition. Building or tent not suitable for use as a full-time dwelling, but used occasionally or seasonally for temporary shelter in connection with a recreational activity, provided such camp is located on a separate parcel. I don't even know if that's necessary. And that only chemical incinerator or privy type toilets are used. I mean, that's kind of an old definition of a camp, but we could update that a little bit. But the idea is like, a tiny house.
You move the speaker. and put it-
Oh, sorry.
I know it's a pain, but until we get this big thing working, that's. how
That would not fit in a tiny house. So, and I don't think it really matters, people talk about, and for as long as I've been doing zoning in Vermont, going on 40 years, people have said, oh, well, it's on wheels, therefore it's not this. And frankly, it doesn't matter if it's on wheels or sleigh bells or whatever. I mean, it's what it's used for. So,
well, that's-
so if you have, if it meets the definition of a camp. So if you've got a tiny house on wheels that is, connected to a septic system and is used for year-round residence, doesn't matter, it's on wheels.
Yeah.
It's a single family house.
Yeah.
But if it's not, if it's, sitting out in the back 40 and,
It's a camp.
it's a camp.
Well, that's what we're
So
saying.
I don't think we need a definition, because if we define it, then you're
We're
saying,
defining by use.
right, we're defining it by use. We don't need a definition of what a tiny home is. That if we're gonna say, if you're living in it year round, then it's a single family house. If you're using it as defined as a camp, then it's a camp.
Right.
So I don't think the definition is really necessary. I think just saying that if you have what is considered a tiny house.
I do know that Mike Gardner is the one who asked for this, and I have spoken to him since, and I said, hey, Mike, what if they just had a sentence that said tiny houses are regulated as they're used? And he was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you think that would cover it.
We can do it. And what
And that was-
Yep,
Yeah,
John had a
I
question. What was that, John?
I was gonna say, well, my question was, I know that he was changing the permitting or I guess it was if you had more footage, you had to pay a little bit more because of the cost of doing some of that.
I think
There was
that
something that changed.
I think that he is changing permitting fees to reflect a percentage of square footage of the project, which is a kind of, I think that's what's happening. But Megan would be able to speak to that much better than me, because she's the one who worked on that. But as far as just that language regarding a tiny house, I have spoken to Mike Gardner about that. He was really the only select board member that was concerned about it. And I do believe
Well,
that if you
then
create that
let's
one
just do it.
sentence, I believe I think
Right.
that covers it. And then you just know this is how we're doing it. So that way there's no question. When people come to him as zoning administrator,
Okay, how
they
does
know,
this-
he knows what,
how does
there's no
this sound?
ambiguity.
Tiny houses
I-
shall
I'm
be
back.
subject
Thank
to the same
Yeah.
requirements as other types of single-family dwellings for the purposes of building codes, zoning, and taxation, and shall be subject to the same requirements as mobile homes for the purposes of tiny house parks. That's kind of complicated.
Yeah.
I would leave parks out of it for now. I don't think we need to go that deep.
Well, yeah, let's just say tiny houses shall be subject to the same requirements. They shall be subject to the same requirements.
As determined by their use.
Yeah, yes.
You're talking about use, yeah.
So we know what that's saying in there.
Yeah, I mean,
Subject to zoning requirements as determined by their use, whether as,
Just, I would
no,
just-
you don't want to
Yeah.
say as
No, I would
camp,
just-
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
No, because then it could be as their use,
Whatever the use
right,
is.
whoever their use does, right.
Make it simple.
Yeah.
and
Okay.
The only thing I could see in addition to that, defining it by use, is in the context of parks, and only because, lots in mobile home parks can be, smaller than, for single family homes in the surrounding district. So if you just added like a sentence in the existing mobile home park standards and said, these standards, apply to mobile homes
And
and
tiny
tiny
houses.
homes.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking, just add tiny house to all, wherever necessary. What? Well. So if someone were to buy a lot in Alta or wherever and just put a tiny home in, there are new requirements for trailer parks that these old trailer parks don't adhere to.
Tie down, cement pants.
I mean, they were grandfathered in. So are we gonna require, I mean, if
It
they're
says in the
new,
legislation that it does. Yes.
In one of our existing parks, if a trailer moved off there, before a new trailer goes on, they have to put a pad.
Right,
All right.
it would have to be up to
Okay.
code. Yeah.
so,
They have-
okay.
they have to do what?
Put pad down.
Cement pad.
Okay,
tie
okay.
down.
The original trailer was just one.
On
But
the
when
ground.
I read the regulations, I mean, they had to be a certain distance apart, which they're not over here.
That was before.
I know, they were
Do we have to vote
grandfathered,
on
that's my
all these?
question.
Is that, do you have to
Will
vote
they
on all
have to
these
be
changes?
now?
Anything,
Buy-
yeah, anything new going in has to be up
Has to
up to
be
new
up to
code.
date. Good.
Yeah.
Well, then I think we're clean. I think we should just.
So it will say tiny houses, tiny homes use will be determined by their use.
No, tiny regulations will be determined, or
Tiny
zoning
home.
or whatever.
Regulations.
Wait.
Time- Okay.
I do
Subject
think,
to the same requirements as other,
yeah, but I think that if you add that language.
According to their use.
You need some kind of a definition.
All right,
Go with-
so then we're taking,
Well, because if you say a tiny home is subject, to the same regulations as a single family home, if it's used as that.
So a
Or
tiny
can't
home, which
be
is
used as
a
that.
definition,
So then you
shall
just,
be regulated
just
by its
need-
use.
which is all you need, except you do need, like, what the heck is a tiny house?
okay, so
Are there-
on
are there
page
any
2 of that
limits on
law,
how
there
many
is
people can live in one?
That's the point.
perfectly
right? That's the point.
How many
adequate
people can live
definition.
in a
It's long, but we only have to do it once.
Let me
And
see
you
if
can
I
put it
have.
as an appendix.
Maybe you ought to have something
Can I
there.
just take a copy of that page?
That's right. I don't think we should be packing.
Get 3-4 families in a little trailer.
I'll give you this back after, I promise. I just want these.
Limited to small families.
Yeah, just- do you want me to copy?
Hey, Megan, can you copy these for me?
I wrote it.
That's okay, just those 2 pages.
Is that gonna be a concern coming up board now?
Okay,
That we gotta deal with on the next board?
so should someone make a motion? That we. go
On
ahead with
adding
this?
the definition and that language to the bylaws about tiny houses?
Where did you end with the language?
You just wrote it down.
I didn't write it down. She's gonna
Oh.
copy it. I'll write it down. Rebecca, say it slow. You ready?
Do you rewrite down? Yes.
Yes, I do.
Tiny houses shall be, and then asterisk, and we'll have an
As
definition
defined
elsewhere.
as, yeah.
And then,
Defined as, and then enter. I'm writing Megan's language.
Thank you, ma'am. I got it right here.
Smooth this along, 'cause we have other ones.
Mhm.
In that bill,
yes,
they discussed how many people could live in a.
10.
Family of 10.
I didn't see anything, I didn't find anything about that.
What is that?
Did we do that anywhere else?
Okay.
It's subject to same
Defined as
regulations.
Megan's
as-
language will be regulated by their use. Good, okay. So it's gonna say tiny houses defined as. Here we go. A tiny house. Tiny house means a structure intended for year-round occupancy that contains facilities for sleeping, eating, cooking. All right, and sanitation is constructed on either a permanent foundation or on a trailer or semi-trailer. As those terms are defined pursuant to 23 VSA subsection 440 and has more than 400 square feet of area. Michelle, are you still there?
No more than
No.
400 square feet.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm still here.
Lofts. Is that,
Yeah, 400 square feet excluding loft.
And then a tiny house that is built as a trailer or semi-trailer, and I think we should add camp also to that. Shall be subject to requirements of 23 VSA subsection 371, 512, and 1222.
Have
And
we done that in our bylaws, said what state regulations are subject to? Did we do that all throughout?
We have some.
Is it
State
really-
code.
is it- do you think it's
When
necessary?
we say state code.
Yeah, just say state code.
Okay.
Cross that.
We do this to find it when you said.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Where was I? And shall be secured to the trailer or semi-trailer in a manner that is approved by the traffic committee as that term is defined pursuant to 19 VSA.
No, just in the forms for people.
I think we should stop after C.
Yeah, I don't think that we should add the contains facilities for sleeping, eating. I think that it should just be that it's 400 square feet area excluding any lofts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
kind
I
of
think,
agree with that.
agree, because the other stuff's gonna be in state law. anyway.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
So
So we have,
does
a-
anybody want me to read over everything again?
No,
Or
but,
just-
but I think we should try to add in, like they were just discussing is, maybe amount of people that can be in them,
Amount of people that can occupy
occupy the place.
with no
You know,
more
the town
than,
manager
do we do that with
But
housing?
I mean, I
I
think
think
we're
the parking
nitpicking at this
trailers?
point.
Has to said some say how many people live.
Well, you
Oh, but
probably,
you may be living
Unless
out
there's
on the
something in
back
state
porch.
code now.
it is, I mean, I don't know, I mean, that's a tough call, 'cause if you do that, then, you know, you're also, you know, you're allowing this multifamily housing unit, so you're gonna start, you know, limiting the number of people.
Do
per
we limit the
apartment,
number of people
right,
that can be in a
or-
camp?
Do we? I mean, do we
No.
limit the number of people who
So-
can live in a small house?
I don't think that we should limit this
I think
either.
we should just,
You might have Christmas visitors, you might have guests come for a little bit, but not permanently.
I don't know, there's, you know, there's regulations, you know, there's zoning regulations, and then there's other things, you know, you can't regulate everything through
No.
zoning. either,
yeah,
'cause
I
then
don't think we
think
want to
about
go
the
there.
poor zoning administrator, right? Like having to go around and count how many people are living in a house.
Yeah.
No, yeah, no, I mean, I just don't think we want to be that intrusive.
I mean, it's not like that's not important, because it's very important.
It is
but-
important.
But I think it's maybe more of a, you know, a health and safety.
Social services.
If
Yeah.
we check these parks today, you'd find.
Oh, you know, I was just thinking of,
As long as it's not a health officer.
of a family of, I don't know what they were,
Yeah.
Latino immigrants working on Strohmeyer's farm and living in those trailers.
Mhm.
You know, quite a large, you know, family of 5 kids and, you know, and 2 or 3 adults living in one trailer.
Is that the planning board situation? No.
No.
You know,
Other-
are we
other
gonna go
agencies?
into Strohmeyer's and say, hello, you have too many, you know?
Okay, I move that we accept, accept the addition to the bylaws that Tiffany read.
I can
Second.
read it again if you want. Any discussion?
The new legislature comes down.
Well, it's basically falling in line with that.
the house now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're falling in
All
place
right,
with
so
it.
why don't, you know, why worry about it? We
Yeah.
got something to last over that.
Yeah.
If there's any changes, we'll change it.
Right.
John?
Big deal.
Aye.
Aye.
I,
Brian?
He dozed off.
Is Brian still
No,
there?
he's still on the screen, yeah.
Aye.
Okay, and I am also an I, so we will make those changes to the bylaws. Next is flying object and drones. Jim Sullivan, is there anything on that? Because we couldn't find anything.
There's nothing.
Well, so,
in the state law.
so, you know, it goes back to, well, you know, what do you usually, what can you really reasonably regulate through your land use regulations? And so I pulled up this today off of the internet, right? This is the Federal Aviation Administration regulations for, you know, private use of drones, non-commercial use of drones. And, you know, they have a bunch of regulations and standards and stuff that apply. And, you know, it doesn't really matter what your zoning says. You gotta comply by
You
the
gotta-
federal aviation. There's
Yeah.
usually
Right,
requirements.
right.
And that's. they
But
have
you
a-
also have to enforce them. Somebody has
Well,
to.
yeah, that's true. That's true enough. And you have, I don't know what the FAA enforcement's like in Southern Vermont. But you know, you've got, you know, these, like, the hobbyist use of drones, which is certainly what is most common around here, and that's what's covered by this. And it's fairly straightforward what you can and can't do.
Okay.
And then there's not, you know, the commercial use of drones, and there's like lots and lots and lots of regulations and licensing requirements and everything else for those. But none of them are really, you know, zoning land use issues. They're really, you know, they're in somebody else's ballpark.
Well, and there's also like common law where that applies to a certain distance over a
Yeah,
person's
there's a
house.
lot of it. There's a
and
lot of
down.
stuff about 400 feet and operating them, you know, within 400 feet of the ground and stuff like that. But it's all in there. How do you enforce that exactly? That's probably a good question for, you know, the FAA. But there. I mean, I could think of one situation where you might want to have something in your zoning regulations, and that is like if there was a place where people got together and routinely, thank you, sorry about that, and routinely, you know, gathered to fly their drones. I remember years ago there was like a model plane flying
Yeah.
club that operated down at the
Right.
racetrack down here, and that raised some issues.
Did.
And so like if you got a bunch of people coming in, you know, a couple times a week, you know, and they're flying a bunch of drones and it's got, then they're using the land to gather to do an activity. And you could regulate that under zoning.
Do we need to regulate it before we have a problem?
Well, that's the
Well,
question. Is there going to be a
Does
problem?
it exist?
No, and you
But
know.
it did at the racetrack. It was a problem.
Yeah, that was a
So,
number of
yeah,
years ago. I
someone
remember.
Yeah,
told
oh, yeah.
me-
I think that was more for noise though.
Right.
Well, whatever it
And
was, but it
so-
looked like
Drones
they were
don't make
flying
much
Route
noise.
7, they looked like a real plane.
But someone was telling me that she was at a state park up on the top of a mountain somewhere. And there was drones all over the place and people screaming, get those out of there. And, but, you know, that was a state or a federal park, you know, and we don't have anything like that here. I mean, I could think maybe the quarry, I don't know.
Nobody's delivering pizza, so.
I think we should revisit this when it becomes an issue that we need.
Right.
Yeah, I really don't think it's something we need to.
I just see it as a great opportunity for using my shotgun if my.
Yeah.
The only thing I see is if people start flying in on helicopters, the mini helicopter pad.
Well, that's a whole different animal.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, or if
Yeah.
we were to get an airport.
but again, I
And
think
then
that.
Amazon want to use it to deliver packages.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and they do,
Yeah,
right?
right.
That's
Not
true.
here, though.
Not yet.
Not yet,
Yeah.
Pizza delivered.
Right.
I can only get delivery from certain places. All right, so we'll revisit that. Yeah.
So,
Oh, do you wanna? You have something else about it?
no, I don't think, I just wish we could get these passed.
Well, you can, but.
Do it.
it's-
Getting
it's-
close.
You're getting close. We talked about it.
Okay,
No.
so can we, and before we go to the village designations, if that's not something that the select board asked us to work on, let's go to the camps and adding. So the select board wants us to add camps to RR1 and RR2 without permitting. That's what was originally in the bylaws. Right. So to return it to the original. Return it to the original bylaws.
Yeah, that's a simple thing to do. You know, when I looked over the provision that's in the forest one today, I noticed it said, you know, a hunting or fishing camp, and I think maybe that's a little bit too limiting
Right.
because it doesn't necessarily need to be used for hunting. It could just be
Deer camp.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
take
they
that
might-
out.
yeah. So just like a private camp, just leave it with that.
Right. I agree with you.
Party overflow.
Swimming camp.
Yeah.
So.
But that's an easy one.
Yeah, that's an easy
Just
one.
cut and paste.
So with all of these revisions, are we going to send them back over to Jim to cut and paste and slip it in there?
If-
or How are we gonna do that? Or are we gonna do it who's gonna do it?
If you guys have the Word document, I think you do, you're more than welcome to do it yourself, or I can do it if you want me to. It might take me
I
a
don't think
couple
we
of
do
weeks.
have the Word document.
Okay, well, I can send
I
it to
know, I
you if
know.
you'd like. to
Yeah.
do it.
Good, and we could designate
Yeah.
somebody to,
I just,
or make, yeah.
yeah, Megan. you do that.
We
Yeah,
designate
that's-
Megan to do
works
it.
for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so can I entertain a motion to put the camps, back to what the
Old
original
bylaws,
bylaw was and take out, the hunting and fishing part of the
Purpose.
purpose?
So
Would you wanna say sports?
Just can't, or just
No,
Anyone
private
have,
camp.
yeah, just camp,
I'll second that.
okay, any discussion?
Yeah, what about the sewer business?
The
We're
what?
talking camps. What about the sewer business? We're talking camps.
What about the sewer? What are you talking about?
What, I don't think
You
that,
can't have a sewer up over a certain height on the
Oh,
mountain,
2,500 feet, yeah.
whatever the hell it is.
is
So
that
what are
already
we
the
gonna do?
bylaws?
Just forgive that? Are we gonna forget that? Or what's the story? That's all. I just question.
Well, wouldn't that still?
No,
be-
that's what makes them a camp. I mean. if they
That's
don't-
what distinguishes
the
it from a
sewer.
camp from being a
Right.
regular house to live in, a small house, or getaway house.
So why do
Is the-
we?
In the description that Jim read, it mentioned a chemical toilet.
Yeah,
Chemical toilet,
pri-
something like that.
privies,
That's
yeah.
fine.
Those are legit for camps. Once you put in like a state permitted septic system, then it's not a camp anymore.
Doesn't it already say in the bylaws that it can't have a
Yeah.
septic system, that
Yeah.
it has to have,
Basically, yeah.
it has to have like a
So
Yeah.
we can still do a camp
incinerating
site.
or
Yeah.
chemical.
Right.
You know, anything.
chemical toilet.
Yeah.
Do you have a further
So that's-
question about that?
That's the difference between a camp and a,
Yeah.
and a guy's got a permanent home away from house, away from
Yeah.
his real home.
Yeah, I mean, the concern always has been like, you could build a fairly rustic camp and, you know, on the top of the mountain. And where
Well,
in the
Deborah
in the
Nicholson-
forest
Nicholas
district, but
said-
if you put it in with a septic system, then it's pretty easy for people to start living in it full time. And then you got, you know, a house
Then you
Yeah,
got
with-
one that's
with-
up where it shouldn't be.
with kids in it and everything else that need to go to school and
Nicholas
the
said.
fire
Above the
department and everything
2,500
else.
foot
And
line.
it's-
We're back to
So,
spaghetti.
so
line.
that's that's the big concern about the septic system, but I think it's covered in the bylaw now.
I think so too.
It is.
Yes, and that was the discussion. And second, so now we can vote. John? Jim?
Right.
Brian?
Aye.
Aye.
Barbara? And I am an I also, so we will make that change also. So then the next thing that they wanted us to work on was the cars on private property. They wanted us to increase the number of allowable unregistered cars on private property to 3 without a timeline for getting them registered, and adding penalties for having more than the allowable number of unregistered cars on the property, a per month fine.
I think we ought to have some language in there that says something about screening. 'Cause
I say the same thing.
I
The
think
state
it's-
says if you can't see it, it ain't there.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned, it ain't there.
Yeah, but I don't,
Yeah, if there's
on the
the
other
fencing
hand,
or
if you
something.
can't see it.
If you
and there's
can,
5 cars all lined up. in
if
a
you
row,
can see it, that's one
Looks
thing.
like
But
heck,
if you
you know.
can't
There is
see
a
it,
problem here.
you got a
on
drone.
Route 7.
That's your problem.
Yes.
After the,
Go for it, Jen.
okay, no, but this, and it's affecting all of us.
Yes,
Because
I'm
Route
listening.
7 is a major highway.
Yeah, and it's.
Okay,
it's
there
how
we
Pownal
have-
appears to
there we
me.
have 2 legitimate places, and in the middle of it is a junkyard.
Right.
And everybody sees it, and
I
that's,
think that's Pownal.
well, that's power. What do you want to do with it? Do you want to cause
Bomb
everybody in town grief? Or was something with having a limit on the number of cars you can have back in the woods? Or, this is a can of worms.
It is. And we also need to think about the fact that some of these people can't afford to take this stuff off their property. It's there because they don't have the means to get it not there.
Good legitimate junk's worth money.
They can make $300.
You
for
could
selling-
call
selling it
up
for-
somebody and they
And
come
they'll
and take
come
it
and
away.
get it.
They'll come and get it.
So,
I
that
think
make,
they wanted it to reflect the state. There's a state
I think that's state
number, and I remember from that meeting, they said that they were hoping that it could just be increased to the level where it matches what the state of, like, kind of allows for work cars. You know, cars that aren't registered, they're being worked on.
Can you? like-
Google it, yeah.
well,
Yeah.
it's 3 cars, isn't it?
Yes,
Is it
it's
three?
three, they wanted it
Three
increased to 3.
Yeah.
And what is it in our
It's
bylaws?
rules.
One, I believe,
Well,
and they
one.
only give you 30 days to like.
Got 1 in
Yeah.
30 days
You're
and a
working on
fine.
a car.
That ain't right.
That's not, that's
And
too much.
while the
That's too
DMV
much
is
to ask.
currently by
Right.
appointment, only takes 30 days to get an appointment.
Right.
And 90 days to get anything in mail.
Well, I think
so.
about like too, like, you know, like a kid's working on a car, you know, project
Right.
car. and
Well, we
it's, you know,
have a
that's-
lot of that in town. People are just working on stuff. And I know there's a lot where people have a car that they have and then they got
They're
a
using
donor
it.
car.
Yeah,
it's
the donor
bigger,
car.
And they're taking
We're
parts. off of that.
cannibalizing.
But is there some language that we could use to cover that? In other words, people can have cars if they're working on them.
Are you gonna go
Well,
and
that's
check
why
on
this-
those people?
Well, it's,
That's the problem with that. Why put language in that we can't possibly enforce?
Do we have-
well, the thing.
When was the
thing
last
is, like,
time you worked on this car, ma'am?
Well, the bigger thing is like
Yes,
what Ronnie,
yes.
what Ronnie said is a bigger thing. I think if it's visual from the road,
Well,
Yeah.
that's the thing.
that's where something
That's
should
what I
be
don't
done.
like.
Yeah, there's,
Yeah.
A
So
fence
what-
put up or something to stop the
Yeah.
visual from the
Why
road.
not say that you
Or
can
clean
have
them up.
3 cars on your property and anything more than that, you need to have screened in?
I think you should screen even 3 personally. but-
well,
It says you can have
I
3.
really
3 is,
hate
as far
it
as I'm concerned, is
that-
fine.
what people, what visitors, what potential business people there might be come up Highway 7 or down Highway 7, and what they see
Yeah, me
is.
too. It's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's bags of rubbish, this trash there.
And
But-
and the trailers there are,
They're before the DRB now.
okay. And I really think that we should make provisions for.
We've had long discussions
We've had,
with a lot of people in the auditorium. Speaking of,
And what
I
did they
spoke up
say?
on it and I said, look it, how you gonna do that? I've already got 5 vehicles. You can't see any of them from the highway.
Mhm.
How you gonna get away with that? The
Well-
state says I can have 3, period. I'm going by the state law, not town of Pownal's, thing they draw up. We're drawing up something. All right, we're here discussing it. You don't want any junk? Another person's got a rake in his yard, an old rake that they used 30, 40, 50 years ago, and calls that an ornament. That's a beautiful thing. It's still a piece of junk.
Yeah.
If you had a dozen washing machines out there, I'd say, well, look, come on, clean it.
Well, that's what's
Okay.
up there. It's not a rake lying in the yard.
here's, when I went up to my grandson's,
Oh, you got something in your yard? Was I picking you out?
when we went up to my grandson's graduation at Clarkson, there was in the middle of the town, there was a bunch of toilets all over the property. And this guy, he put flowers in them. I mean, there were hundreds of them. And I said to him, what's this? Well, people like us try to make this guy do something. And here's where he got back at it. The
Yeah.
toilets were, I might have been a plumber, I don't know what it was, but they were toilets from all ages all over there. So,
Did you find that?
It's not, no, I've not
So be
heard that.
careful what you
yes,
wish for.
yes,
Well, that's the difference
I do
with
know-
defining art versus.
Yeah.
yes.
I do not,
There
just
you
you
go.
guys
That's the
know
big
for
one.
somebody to think about, I do not believe that the select board will put it forward without the cars running through it.
Yeah, I mean, that changes in section 8.9. Right now it says,
And
no,
removing the timeline for registration.
right, yeah, you could just say no more than 3,
Mhm. Just
at
one-
the
just
at the
changing one.
beginning of it. And then you change, the
Mhm.
timeline, whatever you want to do.
Mhm.
Okay, are these 3 cars that are
Unregistered.
Unregistered. Unregistered. and
Unregistered.
covered.
Unregistered vehicle.
Yeah, unregistered, and then
Deadheads.
they want us to come up with a longer timeline in order to let people get them registered.
Or give.
Or
Or
remove,
not.
Yeah.
or remove.
Registered.
Or just look at them. They like them.
And a fine for violation.
Do we currently have a regulation for salvage yards? in
Yeah,
Pownal?
we do.
We do.
And the health officer used to take care of that. 'cause I remember
Yeah.
there was
Really?
that one up on- Supposedly, the one up on, he did do something like that one up on, across the river. Up on the river
Oh,
bank there.
yeah.
That one had about a
Oh.
dozen cars.
Oh,
Oh, derelict.
I was gonna slide in the river, yeah.
It was-
I think it should say something along the lines of, no more than 3 unregistered vehicles that are visual from the road.
Yes,
Because again, if
That's
it's not
visible.
visual from the road, it's not
That's
visible.
concern
Yeah,
for
that's
anybody.
what's meant,
Well,
yeah.
If they already put a fence up, whatever,
Yeah.
that's their land, they can.
I mean, they could grow weeds or
They have
visible.
whatever
Well,
they
the
want.
weeds will
Visible.
probably grow up, and in the wintertime, 340, you'd like to say 346, 7, and, but you can't. You can't,
Right, you
Yeah.
can't.
you can't.
I mean, if your neighbor's going looking, and going, it's got junk, I mean, that's a issue. for Fred to go take a look
So
at,
That's
whatever, but-
Ron's
or the zoning officer.
issue is like,
Are
But-
you the
my
new
art
officer?
is his junk.
Right.
Yeah.
so-
Right.
So
No,
how
I-
long do you think?
All I'm saying is different people have different choices.
Right.
But if you had a dozen washing machines out there, I'd be bitching about it.
Yeah.
I'd say that is nothing but junk. It should be in the junkyard. But if a guy has, I got a 1939 Buick, I got a 1931 Ford.
Yeah, we have.
They're well worth a lot more than most of the cars people are driving
All right,
right
let's,
now.
let's talk about how long they should, sorry, how long. they
Keep 'em
should
as
have
long
to
as
get
you
them
wanna keep
registered.
'em.
It's good.
Why should they be a difference? The hayrake will last forever. Let it sit there.
I have no idea. 6 months.
Well, it says, I mean, in the bylaw, it's talking about
Can you
junk,
tell me what section for this?
section 8.9. I mean, the way it's written
8.9.
now, which I realize you're gonna change, but it says junk or inoperable motor vehicles. Now, if you change that to no more than 3, if they're junk or inoperable, you never need to register them.
That's right.
I mean,
Right.
they're like you say, they're project cars or they're parts
Mhm.
cars or whatever, and they're just there. So the timeline doesn't really matter because you're never gonna register them anyway, probably.
Put it like that, don't even take that part out.
Just say you can have up to 3. I mean, if that's what you wanna do, say you can have up to
Up to
3.
3.
Well, I.
No more than
Unregistered.
3
I think three
visible
is too many,
from
but-
the road,
Page-
and then
Unregistered.
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 I think only violation would only be if you got more than,
Right,
if you got more than 3 and they're all visual from the road, you're not trying to clean them up.
right.
That was where you would get something like that.
So then a fine, a monthly fine for violating that.
Well, any,
So if
any
you
zoning,
can-
any zoning violation is gonna be subject to, the statutory provisions for how you enforce your zoning regs. And I mean, basically then the zoning administrator issues a violation notice and it can be, subject to a fine, but actually imposing the fine is a difficult process. So basically, you issue a violation notice, the person can appeal it to the zoning board or the development review board. And then they make a decision as to uphold the notice of violation or not. And then if they do, then the person who is violating the ordinance can appeal it into environmental court, and then your municipal lawyer gets involved, and then the judge imposes the fine.
So us imposing a fine is pointless.
It's not a simple.
It's
solution.
It's possible, but basically your town lawyer is gonna be
Yeah,
involved.
don't.
It's
It's gonna
not a
cost us
simple.
as much as.
You-
we're
we're
Much as
making.
it's
thinking-
worth.
Let's
Fine.
get this cleaned up. Let's make it look better and let's.
We would
And
hope
it
people
doesn't work.
would help themselves and start doing it. That's
Yeah,
what you hope
yeah.
for,
Right.
but good luck to you.
All right, so 86 the fine. Yeah. All right,
Well, I mean, the fine, just recognize, the fine is in there. It's in state law. It's just not like you don't hand somebody a ticket
Yeah,
and say, here, pay your
The
$500
solution-
fine.
the
wind up costing you more
Solution
than
is not simple and quick.
$500.
Yeah, you gotta go, you gotta.
So the
do
fine
the
is
Even if
for
our
state law.
zoning administrator
Yeah.
is a big burly guy, it's still not quick.
what else? That was all that the select board wanted us to work on. And we are kind of skipped over and went to Jim with the tiny homes and flying objects. So now we can do the designated villages discussion.
What was the discussion?
You have three.
Yeah, we had.
We were going to go visit
Yeah,
them
I,
and we,
I brought it up,
people
I
were
think
sick.
in our first,
Oh,
our
wait,
first
wait,
meeting.
we have to vote. We
Okay.
have to vote.
Yeah, on the motion, yeah, let's get to
Yeah.
vote, Jesus,
Right.
yes. I'm- I
Oh,
move
on the,
I
on
move the
the,
motion.
And the cars.
On the
I
cars.
second it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You second it? Any discussion?
Well, I don't quite understand. So you're saying you can have 3 cars right out in your front lawn, right on the
Yep,
road
yes, yep.
with no screening?
Visible.
Yes.
That's
Visible.
right.
Oh, I'm
Visible.
not gonna vote for
Okay,
That's
it's
okay.
okay.
that. I won't win.
John?
Aye.
Brian? Brian?
Why?
Fred?
Aye.
Megan?
Nay.
And I, so the ayes have it. Motion carried. Now we can talk about village designation, designated villages. I don't know what that discussion was about. Do you remember?
I brought it up in our first meeting. I know that we, as a planning commission, worked on it pretty heavily to make sure we got the designation, 3 designations. And my question now is, now what? Because we got them and we're not
We
doing
have to-
anything. We're not promoting anything.
Are you
The reason
I
we
think-
went for them was to get qualified.
Couldn't get
You can't
grants.
get qualified
To get
for a
grants.
loan
Okay.
unless you're a village designation.
Okay,
We missed several grants because we didn't have that.
Okay.
bylaws.
People couldn't put in because they weren't in the
I guess
village.
my question is, are we gonna actively do anything, trying to
I think
get
there's-
grants,
there's
like
room to do
Sure, they are.
rehabilitation grants for?
That's what
Yeah,
people are
stuff like
doing. We
that.
have all
Yeah.
these
I
new
think good.
people.
Yeah.
That's
Pretty
That's
good.
what we
Yeah.
were doing with Parks and Rec
Yeah.
and things like that.
And I suggested taking like walking tours of
Yeah,
all of
yeah,
our 3
yeah.
designated areas and just look at them and listen to the sights and sounds and try to get an idea of what could be done with them, what we could do to help with those areas, to revitalize areas or whatever. Instead of just not doing anything since we got the designations.
Send all of you, if you'd like to read it, my SEDS application, which is where I wrote a vision for this town green area for
Okay.
this, like, and that SEDS application is interesting because even if you don't get picked as like one of the main projects, you still go back every year and you keep working on that vision and developing and refining it, and you re-narrate that again and again every year. And so I can send that to you guys. You can see what kind of I riffed in my own, before we had a Parks and Rec and before, while we were forming a Parks and Rec and all that. If you're interested, I'd be happy to share that with you. Yes.
But,
That's true.
in my
Yeah,
mind,
sure.
as I'm thinking through this, I'm thinking, is there, down the line, we could possibly open a bunch of cans of worms, like addressing speed limits through these other designated villages. Ramping the speed down a little bit,
They can
making
do
it
that.
more appealing for, if somebody wanted to open a home-based business or something there.
Well, that's a good example, if I can. Like, there's lots of different grant programs out there that reference these village centers. So one of them would be like just using your example, like the transportation alternatives grant. So it might not be specific to the speed limit, but a lot of times there's things like they call traffic calming, So you do some thing to the roadway to make it more appealing and kind of slow people down. So maybe you put landscaping along or, something like that, or crosswalks or something to let people know they're coming into a village area. And they could, it seems like not a lot, but it can cost a couple $100,000. And you can get, the transportation alternatives grant, and you get lots of bonus points in your grant application if you're a village center. And also in the village center, it's not just what the municipality can do, but it's what individual property owners can do in the village center too, because they're eligible for various tax credit programs. If they want to improve their building, they could get, like 50% of the cost of the improvement tax credit under certain programs if they're in a village center. So it's stuff that you can do, and it's probably also like an informational thing that you should get out to people who own properties in the villages too.
Well, Jim, who was that person that gives you, he was at the planning board a couple of times.
Ri- Well, my village center contact is Richard and Maury.
Yeah, Maury.
Yeah,
Maury's been here.
yeah.
And I think they're selecting them and inviting.
Yeah, we talked about that, and
Yeah.
Tim and I had a really nice meeting with him and
Very-
talked all about the different programs there, so Richard Moore is great,
Very
very helpful.
interesting man.
I would suggest him coming to talk to you guys if
We're
you're gonna
gonna-
take
well,
on
I-
village education.
I think the last time we talked about this, we said we were gonna invite him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that this is such a big thing that we definitely need to wait until after the
I think you
bylaws
get
are
your
passed.
bylaws.
So we
Right.
need
Yeah,
to,
right.
like, focus
Yes.
on that.
But yeah,
Well,
I'm thinking, what are we gonna do as a planning commission now? You know, big projects are pretty well taken care of, bylaws are taken care of, the town plan is taken care of, but now what do we do? We have three designated villages that maybe we can start like focusing attention on, talking over possibilities, build a vision for each one, or are all three incorporated?
It's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I was gonna say, is there, do we need 3 villages to get those grants?
We've got them.
Or is it just,
We've got them already.
Yeah, we
We've
got
got
'em.
3 villages. for-
So in
for a
North
long
Pownell,
time.
you know, there's an empty store down there.
Right.
And then if somebody's gonna build a pizza place down there in Old Kelly's and little activities
Yeah.
going on. There's been. some
nice
bike-
housing fixed,
Yeah.
houses, several houses down there have been fixed up a
Very
lot.
nice.
So that's private, but it's, I don't know if they got,
Also, they've had some bike racing down.
Yeah.
You know,
What's the speed limit on that flat, on the curve?
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
45 miles an hour.
What curve?
Just
By
don't
your
slow
house.
people down to
By
25
the
miles an
firehouse,
hour.
Yeah, 35
35?
through town.
Yeah.
That's what it is. They go a lot
Yeah,
faster.
they go
than
faster,
that.
sure,
yeah,
35.
There's no cops around
Yeah.
there.
Well, I'm not
So,
gonna blow the
okay, so we
whistle.
have North
No, you're
Pownell, we
not.
have Center Pownell. I'm still unclear.
And down by Stewart's. Too.
By
Isn't that the
Stewart,
other
Pownell
village
Village.
designation?
Town village, basically like where the region is,
Cherry Court.
Cherry
Cherry Court, where,
Used to be
Doug,
too.
Doug Kaminsky, his
Goes to-
property,
Those are Magnolia,
it goes,
pretty much.
Yeah.
That area.
down to
to the
Magnolia,
motel,
yeah.
the
does it
state
go to the
line.
library? Goes to the
Oh, yeah,
library too,
all that nice little area.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very nice.
Church Street.
The only discouraging thing about the villages is the villages aren't big enough so you can have anything. But that's where the sewer is and that's what they promote.
Yeah.
They want you to get a spot where you can, them little homes, that's what they're talking about.
That's what they, that's.
Stick
what the
them in
legislation's
between all
all
of
about.
that.
Yeah.
I got a 2.2 acre lot right in the center of the town.
But you know,
I
I
could
mean,
put 4 houses
we
there.
have
Why would
we
I
have
do
an
that?
elementary school, we need more kids.
Yeah, we need more kids.
We
We
don't
had a lot of
only
kids
need
go to that
business.
school a long time ago.
Yeah.
Then they had to move it all up
We
here.
have to schedule the next hearing.
First of all, the racetrack built that up
And
here.
then we can have.
The town of Pownal built that.
You know,
Nobody else.
a major
Or
corporation
Navajo?
just invested
Yeah.
a lot of money.
Wait, are we gonna,
Whether
do-
you like
wait,
it
we're
or not.
scheduling
Stewart's.
our next
Stewart's,
We're
yeah.
scheduling our
And,
next
uh,
hearing.
Dollar
to read
General.
the
Right.
changes
Look
that
what
the
they did
select
with
board
hearings
wanted.
for
Oh,
the
my God.
bylaws.
We're
Yeah,
doing all
yeah,
the
yeah.
bylaws.
Okay,
And, hey,
now,
they're
with
thinking-
that,
they're
do
thinking
you
Pownal
want
Summit.
us
Oh, yeah.
all to attend? to this?
Very impressed with
Wonderful.
that.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
All right, did everybody hear that? It would be really good if we all attended.
So we need to
the
schedule our
hearings.
next hearing for our bylaws, our hearing, right? We only have to
Yeah,
have one.
Jim, correct. They have to have another hearing and then send it back to them, or could they just make these changes and just have the play, have the select board do these their hearings?
Yeah, actually, you really can just send it back to the select board
I would
unless,
do that.
unless you
Yeah.
feel like you've really done
Yeah.
sweeping changes.
Megan, can you add us to
And
the
then they
agenda
will
for
hold their
Thursday?
2 more hearings, correct? So they
Yeah.
can schedule those
Yeah.
next week.
Okay, so now we need to,
So
So July
Megan's gonna adjust the language.
I'll
and
send
we're
you
gonna
the Word version.
read Word, okay.
Will you send it to Megan?
I'll send it to Megan.
Yes.
And I will ask the select board to make sure they review the changes before we go into a meeting and schedule hearings. They don't wait for hearings to look at the language. Do you know what I'm saying? So that way, if they have an issue, it can be done without doing a whole hearing process again
Right.
and then find out, right?
so
Strike us down.
when is our next
There's your little
meeting?
home.
Our next meeting should
There's
be,
your little home.
So
right
you need
there,
to vote
12
to
by
send it
16
back to the.
oh, yeah, so,
or 14 by 14.
Can I move that
Depends
we
how square you want it
send
to
these
be.
changes made by Megan back to the select board and let them handle the hearing. Scheduling and hearing.
Yeah, I see.
Thank you, Jimmy.
any discussion?
That'll work.
Yeah, so I thought the planning commission would have to have another.
No, he just said you don't. You could just, because you made those changes,
Yeah,
because you made those
Okay.
changes, you can just send them right back. They were,
it's really because you essentially, when you get something like that from the select board back, you kind of have to do what they ask for. So, you're making the changes at the request of the select board, and you do, what your input is really at this point is when the select board has their hearing or hearings, then you can report to the select board if you have, what your thoughts are about those changes as planning commission.
So
So-
we're gonna send it back to there's a
Select board.
motion.
Motion and a second, that was the discussion. Yes?
Aye.
Brian?
Aye.
I,
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried,
100%.
100%. All right, so,
Very agreeable tonight.
public comment. Does anybody in the public have comments?
Any public out there?
Michelle around?
Michelle,
Anybody
No
left?
public in the comments, so can I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Wait a minute, when is our next meeting?
Oh, yeah, our next meeting is, it's usually what, the
That's- I don't
first
know.
Tuesday
first Tuesday,
of the month?
first and third Tuesday, right?
So that would be
Yeah.
July 1st, that's like,
No, we're not doing that.
No.
Mm,
So first,
Hear the, hear the select
oh, that's a Thursday. you're right.
July 6th
July 6th.
would be the first. Everybody
week
good?
from now, a week from tonight.
Oh, yeah, we don't want to do
No.
that.
Okay.
Sometime
How about the
in
third-
August.
All right, let's do it first, the first Tuesday in August is the 3rd.
Or you
August.
did the third in July.
Well,
No.
it's kind of.
It's
Oh,
first
yeah.
and third, first
Yes.
and third.
So is the select board going to vote on these ever?
Doesn't the select board have to
Thursday.
have?
No, they're gonna set a hearing on Thursday.
We've set a
That's
hearing,
set a
nobody
hearing.
will
Set a
show up,
hearings on
and it'll be
Thursday.
over with. It'll be over.
Yeah.
And then
Voice
what, and then they're
experience.
passed?
Yeah,
No, the actual
Well,
hearing.
yeah.
yeah.
All right, so,
Great,
so-
July 20th. July 20th is our next meeting.
okay, good job. And so
For
can
what?
we,
July 20th is our next meeting?
somebody
July 20th is our next
inform
meeting.
us
Because you had
somehow?
the 6th, not the
Yeah.
20th already. How the hell that happened?
We
Pretty
just
easy.
looked at our calendars in our phone. That's how
Oh,
it
that's right.
happened.
So
20th. So
Do-
the
do-
6th is out.
do we need to
Six is out.
discuss having like a phone tree to?
Sure, you wanna have a
for
phone tree?
reminders of that we have a meeting?
Just look in the town.
So
You don't have-
what I do is I check my email, then I check the town website, because now with our fantastic new town website, all of the upcoming meetings are right there on the
Right
front
there, right.
page. So that's what I personally do.
But I would like, if
How do you get
I
on the
don't,
town website?
I'll call you. You gave me your phone number last time. I got you, Ronnie.
Well, I'm just curious.
I got me.
I would want, if I don't show up at a meeting,
Yeah,
assume I planned on being there, and I spaced. That's
And
what
call.
happened last time. Just give me shoot me a text, or give me a call or something, and say, get down here.
where are you at?
Yeah, because that was really very
in my head.
annoying last
Yeah.
last meeting.
I actually, I found it by accident. I was online afterwards. And I saw Megan put the
Can we,
recording. the
can we
Zoom
adjourn before this conversation?
recording. Yes, okay. Yes, okay.
I think there's a motion.
I made a motion that we. adjourn.
Okay.
I second.
Any discussion about that? John,
Aye.
Hi.
Brian,
Aye.
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 Amen.
Aye, yeah,
Amen.
yeah, yeah.
Later, Brian.
I don't know.
See ya.